In this video, we're going to walk through a few additional examples from chapter 26. First up, number 1 from page 685, two human traits controlled by a single gene are the ability to roll a person's tongue and whether a person's earlobes are free or attached to their head. Genetic theory says that people will have neither one or both of these traits following the ratio of 1 to 3 to 3 to 9, given by this breakdown in categories here. An introductory bio class of 122 students collected the data shown in this table. Are they consistent with the genetic theory? We're going to start off by writing our hypothesis test. Null hypothesis would be that the proportions of traits occur in this ratio that's given, 1 to 3 to 3 to 9, or we could write it as the breakdown of traits occur with the given ratios. Alternative is that the proportion of traits do not occur in the ratio 1 to 3 to 3 to 9, or the breakdown of traits do not occur with the given ratios. Check the conditions. The first three are pretty straightforward. However, I'm going to spend a bit of time on the fourth one, the expected cells. So it's not telling us exactly what's expected in each of these cells. It's just saying this is the ratio that they're supposed to follow. Now, when we look at that ratio there, we need to note that there are 16 parts there. 1 plus 3 plus 3 plus 9 equals 16. So the actual fractional breakdowns would be 1/16, 3/16, 3/16, 9/16. The first category is the smallest, that's the 1/16. So as long as this is greater than 5, all the other ones will be greater than 5 also. That would result in 1/16 of these 122 students, that's 7.625, that's greater than 5. All these other ones that are bigger than 1/16 are going to be greater than 5. So at this point we can say all expected values are at least 5. So let me start by putting this information in a table. So we have a proportion row, and that's telling us what those fractions were. So for example, this is 1 out of 16. These two were both 3 out of 16, and then 9 out of 16 at the end there. Expected is just all of those proportions times 122. Okay, so now we would go into our calculator. We would put our counts in as list 1. This is our observed data. And list 2 would be our expected data. This is going to be a chi-square goodness of fit test. We have just one row of data here, and we're comparing it to this known ratio breakdown. Running in our calculator, we get a chi-square test statistic of 5.009. There's 3 degrees of freedom. It's 1 less than the number of categories. It's not based on the sample size. And that equates to a p-value of 0.1711. From that p-value, we write our conclusion. Fail to reject the null hypothesis since the p-value is too large. There's insufficient evidence to suggest that the proportions of traits do not occur in the ratio 1 to 3 to 3 to 9. If it asks us to interpret a p-value, we would write something like this. If the null hypothesis is true and the traits do occur with the ratio 1 to 3 to 3 to 9, we would expect a sample of 122 to display this amount of variation from the expected values about 17% of the time. That's about 1 out of 6 times. That's not enough evidence for us to reject the null hypothesis, so that's why we reached the conclusion that we did. Number 24 from page 645. Here we have a breakdown of NYPD officers giving their rank and their sex, and the question is, do these data indicate that men and women are equitably represented at all levels of department? Part A, what's the probability that a person selected at random from the NYPD is female? Okay, we add up all the females. We get 5,613 in this column. We add up all the people in the table. It actually tells us it up here. So we put that over 37,379, and we find that 15% of these officers are female. What's the probability that a person selected at random from the NYPD is a detective? Okay, same idea. We're adding up all the detectives, and we get 4,864 out of that total. 13% are detectives. B star is a question that I'm adding in because it's a good opportunity to review. What's the probability of selecting a female given that the officer is a detective? So we have a given here. The given is that the person's a detective. It's from one of those 4,864 people. And we want to find the probability that we select a female. 806 out of that 4,864. There's a 16.6% chance that we've chosen a female, given that the officer is a detective. Part C, assuming no bias in promotions, how many female detectives would we expect to have? So this is really just an expected value. We would do the row total. Okay, row total is the total of this row here, 4864, times the column total, that was 5613, divided by the grand total, we would expect to get 730.4. Another way we can look at it, on the last slide, we found that 15% of all officers are female. So if these are independent, if there's no bias, we would expect 15% of the detectives to be female. That would give us right around that same 730. What type of test is it? We only have one sample here. So we have the whole group of 37,379 police officers. We're comparing two categorical variables, the sex and the rank. So this is a chi-square test of independence. We want to see, is their rank independent of their gender? Hypotheses, rank and sex of NYPD officers are independent. Alternative, they are not independent. Check the conditions. Again, these first three are pretty straightforward. When it gets to the expected, okay, we're going to look at the smallest cell again. The smallest cell is this one. So we want to find the expected value for that cell. Row total, 228. Column total, 5613. We're going to multiply those two numbers together and divide by the grand total in that entire table. We get an expected value of 34.24. That's the smallest cell. Since that one's greater than 5, all the rest should be greater than 5 as well. Degrees of freedom, rows minus 1 times columns minus 1. So 6 minus 1 times 2 minus 1 equals 5. At this point, we could put it into our calculator, run the test. It gave us this information in part H. The chi-square value is 290.1. The p-value for that is less than 0.0001. State our conclusion. We're going to reject the null hypothesis since that p-value is small. There's sufficient evidence to suggest that the rank and sex of NYPD officers are not independent. And number 26, we're dealing with this same table, except it also gives us this residual table, and it's saying comment on it. Okay, so first off, let's just refresh on how we find that residual table, and let's do it by looking at the cell that we found an expected value for, which was for female detectives. Okay, so we got this previously in part B, or part C, I forget. There were about 730.4 expected female detectives. So to find a chi-square value for that cell, we would do 806 minus that expected value. So observed minus expected, square it, divide by the expected, we get 7.825. Now the residual for that cell, which is this over here, we get by just square rooting that chi-square value. Some of these residuals are positive, some are negative. This one is positive because there are more people observed in this cell than were expected. All these negative residuals means that there were less people observed in that cell than were expected. So with that in mind, we can write our commentary about this residuals chart. There are more female officers and detectives than would be expected if the two variables were independent. So we have more females in those two categories. Conversely, there are less females in higher ranks than expected. All these have negatives, meaning that there are less female sergeants, lieutenants, captains, higher ranks, etc.